Hello, everybody. I am your host, Rashawn Warren, and today I am here with an old friend, known him for a long time. It's Michael Woodhouse. You know, he's a soldier, he's a father, he's an entrepreneur, he's an author, he's a leader, a self-proclaimed mediocre athlete. He's all of that stuff. So come on in, Michael. How you got going? What you got going on?
Hey, what's going on, brother? It's good to see you. Appreciate you having me back on the show.
Wow, no, man, it's all about you, man. It's good to have friends who are doing big things around the world. So tell everybody who you are and get them caught up to you, and we'll pick this thing up.
Okay, so yeah, my name's Mike Woodhouse. I go by Woody, known as Woody. You grow up in the '80s. Everybody's named Mike, John, Will, Harry. So I had like 10 Mikes in my class. So they just started calling me Woody when I was a kid with the last name Woodhouse, and it stuck all through my military career. But no, air defense officer in the Army, did 20 years. That's how I met you, Ray. Just recently retired on the 1st of June, a few weeks back. Interesting story is on my retirement day, I fell down a flight of stairs and broke my wrist. It's still on the mend, but that's it's called going out with a literal bang. So I made sure I ended the career in soldier fashion. But no, it all went well. And yeah, so I just recently published a book, and that's really wanted to want to come back and talk to you. You know, you and I have been having leadership conversations for the better part of a decade, since we were back in the teaching and CCC or in Command and General Staff College as roommates for a while there. We would just constantly be talking about leadership. So I boldly decided to write a book on leadership that I never aspired to, and it published in November. So I was coming on here to kind of talk about that and share some stories and try to promote my book, shamelessly plug my book for your audience on here.
No, that's what it's all about, right? A lot of people have things that they want to accomplish. A lot of people come up with ideas that they never really get out there. You know, I heard this quote a long time. I don't know if it was from David Goggins, but what he said was, at the end of his life, he does not want to go into heaven, and then he meet the Lord at the heaven gates, and they shows him a picture, and he's like, "Hey, what is all that over there?" And he was like, "Hey, that's what you could have been if you would have executed all the things that you thought about." And I only bring that up because I think you're that guy who said, "Hey, you know what? I got this idea. I'm going to put it out there." And then you made it happen. But I think one of the most important things is not that you wrote a book, but who you are, right? Because that plays into the whole book itself. It's the reason you wrote it, right? So you come on from what I know you as a good friend. But you've been a soldier, as you said. You're a father. You're an entrepreneur. You're an author of Seam, and being a leader within itself is something that not many people get an opportunity to experience. So, describe yourself as an entrepreneur, author, father, soldier, leader. What does all that really mean?
Yeah, so really, I think it all started back in 2020 timeframe around COVID. So I was stationed overseas in England with my wife and my 2 boys, and at that point, I realized I was about 14, 15 years into my military career, and when everything came to a complete halt, I was working for NATO. So as soon as, Europe started closing down, I'm on an island in England, everything's closing down. NATO is built on exercising, traveling to different countries in Europe, doing exercising and training in case, another conflict arises. And so when COVID kicked off, everything stopped. Go home, full lockdown. And for the first time in well over a decade, I found myself like, man, what do I want to do for me for a change? Because I was always consumed with work, right? It was, in the military life, work is 24/7, especially as a leader. We're held responsible for, soldiers' health and welfare, their family issues, what are you doing to be, cautious and avert risk and take care of everybody. So it's just constantly on your mind, right? There's never really a release, even though you You can feel like you're present in the moment with your family. There's always that BlackBerry or your iPhone or something that's next to you that, you gotta take it if it rings because the Army's, got you on call. So for the first time, I sat there and I go, "Oh, wow, it's quiet." Like, I can start thinking about me and things I wanna do and things I used to aspire to do before I joined the Army. And, since we couldn't leave the house, a lot of the things I used to do is, like, go to the gym for hours, go out on walks and hikes. They were shutting down hiking paths. You weren't allowed out of your house for more than 30 minutes. So, like, all the things I would do to, like, regulate my emotions and do as hobbies kinda stopped. So I was like, "Okay, now what am I gonna do in the confines of my own home to keep me busy and feel like I'm accomplishing something?" So I started drawing, started doing that I was big into when I was in high school. Um and my wife bought me for my birthday, she bought me an iPad, and then I just started teaching myself how to do digital art and graphic design and going on YouTube because you could pretty much find out how to do everything and watch it in a so I had all this time free, and I'm just watching and learning step by step, slowly getting better and better, and then it got to the point where, I started doing stuff, for the air defense community, just for fun. I was drawing, like, parodies and putting stuff up to get soldiers, smiling. And then I started get following doing that, and, it was one thing after another of like, "Okay, you know what? Maybe I should make some stuff and give it to the soldiers." But, I didn't wanna sell things to soldiers, that's a conflict of interest, right? I wanna be able to give it to soldiers, but not have an officer selling to, an enlisted, so out to I reached out to the Air Defense Artillery Association. I said, "Hey, I got this idea. I'll make all this cool youthful stuff. I'll make gear, t-shirts, hats, stickers, patches, all this stuff, and I'll just give it to you for free, the design, and then you can sell them in your gift shop." And, there was a lot of old heads on there that didn't like the idea of social media and parodies and, bringing humor into things, and, they were like, "No, thanks." Um, so it just kept delaying and delaying, I go, "You know what? I'm gonna do my own association then, 'cause there's a market for this, and, I don't wanna sell things personally." So I started a nonprofit, and I started the Patriot Bros Association back in, 2020, with a few fellow retirees, and, people were like, "You can't be doing that while you're active duty." I was like, "Why not?" You know? It's like, because it's hard, because you gotta do things like conflicts of interest and bylaws and make sure you're doing the right thing, and so the more people were like, "You can't do that," I was like, "You know what? I got time, I'll read and I'll figure out how I can do this." So I did it, and our goal was to raise like 3,000 bucks and maybe give a soldier a scholarship after a year, and in the first year of doing this thing, we raised over $25,000 with just 3 of us doing this grassroots thing, and we're able to give out our first scholarship. And since then, it's grown, and in the last 6 years now, it's gotten to the point where we've given out over $150,000 in scholarships, um, and that was the first step, the reason I'm bringing that up is, like, that was the first step where I released myself and I was like, "What do you wanna do and what's stopping you?" Right? Because there's no the fear is usually what stops most of us, fear of failure, right? But I'm like, I'd rather have 10 ideas that are my ideas and try to do all 10 of them, and 9 of them fail, and I learn from them, and 1 of them succeeds. Because in me, that's not failing, it's just you're learning and growing as a human being, as a leader. So that was really the precipice for me, getting into what can I do with myself? What's this next chapter of Woody's life beyond just being a military officer? So it started with the Patriot Bros, then I'm like, "Oh, I'm doing all this stuff for soldiers, but I also have artistic things that have nothing to do with the Army." So I started my own graphic design company, was doing stuff for other people that had nothing to do with the military, making, logos for small businesses. It got to the point where I've done logos that have been on the sides of fairings for, launches on the Falcon 9 rockets. So I've got a few pieces of art that have launched into space at this point. And, yeah, it's just one thing after another. So that's where the art started and, and life threw me a couple, tough decisions and, you know, put some forks in my road, and that's what led to the book, which we can get into in a minute. But, you know, do you have any similarities or things that have come in your life that are kinda like that, where you got the blinders up and you're focused on one thing, don't see the whole picture, and then at some point you're like, "Oh, the aha moment," where you go, "Oh, wait."
Well, I think, life within itself is like that, like, we've known each other for a long time, and we've talked about all these things that we kinda wanted to do, And, for me, I think it's primarily like I just always felt like I was like meant to help people. I kind of grew up in an environment where people were helping me. Um, so my motivation was kind of to pay it forward, if you will. I started the CIME motivational network. But, that's all we're doing the podcast right now, right? But that was just to give people some perspective because a lot of people got a lot of things going on. They don't really think that they can make it, or they think they're the only one that's experiencing things. And I said to myself, you know what, I'm going to do something so people can get some perspective, so they can hear other people who are going to similar things who are successful, so they know, like, you know what, if that dude is doing it, I can pull myself up out of the dirt, out of the mud, the proverbial dirt and mud, and say, hey, you know what, I can win too. Because I think it's three type of people, honestly, right? We got winners, we got losers, and then we got those people who have yet learned how to win. They need to see some stuff, they need to get taught some stuff, and they're out there and they need to hear conversations such as yours, right? Like you artifice guy, you moving fast, you're doing super duper well, and everyone thinks highly of you, and then you're like, "Ah, you know what? I got other stuff to do," you know? And other people are like, Why did you do that, Woodhouse? Why you don't keep the fight going? Why you?" And you're like, "Well, you know what? I gotta take care of my family." Like this army thing is a job at the end of the day. It's literally a job. And if I immerse myself into this, all of those other things that I've had within my life, you would have never been able to achieve or even go out there. So with all of that being said, let's get straight to it. Let's get to your book, right? Seam, right? What if I'm correct? It's like the adaptive strategy framework for leaders, right? So as I understand it, it's built on the idea that the greatest strength often comes from places where we've been tested. So what inspired you to write Seam, and why is the message so relevant today?
Okay. I'm gonna be vulnerable and give a little transparency, and anyone that gets this book, you'll get a little bit more of an in-depth, understanding because it's a bit autobiographical. Um, so in 2022, my oldest son, Maddox, at the age of 5, was diagnosed with autism, high functioning level 1 autism. And he started having a lot of like manic, episodic behaviors, things that we just couldn't understand, unpredictable responses to things, uncontrollable emotions, and some pretty devastating mental health issues. And at that time, we just moved from England to the States, to Washington, D.C. area. I was going to work for the Space Development Agency at the time. And so I was going through this inner struggle of I was about to go on to the next step of my career. That was kind of a stepping stone, and I was gonna go take up battalion command, and I had no signs or ideas in my mind that I was gonna retire from the Army, right? I was gonna go on to take a command and just keep driving on and soldiering on. And, it got so bad where my son's health was, at a point where it was life-threatening, and his behaviors was life-threatening. And my next step I knew was going to be deploying away from the family and leaving him alone with his mother again, and that unpredictable environment is devastating for, children on the spectrum. So that was the first moment where I was like, "Look, this decision is not hard." I mean, it's hard to tell yourself life is not how you expect it to be, but, putting family first and knowing the right decision was gonna be drop a retirement packet, that wasn't a hard thing because for me, it's family first. I wouldn't be where I was if it wasn't for the backbone and the family that I had, when I was young, and that includes extended family, aunts, uncles, mentors, all that stuff, and I just knew that, in order to save this child's life and be there for him and get him on the right path, the Army wasn't the right solution for me, and it had to come to an end. Um, so that was the first thing that happened. And the second thing that happened was about a month and a half later, I flew out to Los Angeles to be on a military panel for the Association of the United States Army, right? AUSA. And it was focused on space. And I just started to work in this space agency, and I'm sitting up on this giant panel, and it's what they call Chatham House rules, right? So it's a small group of industry and leaders in this room, and it's like non-attributional, right? So closed doors, You can have open, free, transparent conversations, try to solve problems, and then you don't have to worry about people going, "Hey, Lieutenant Colonel Woodhouse said XYZ," and it's on, an op-ed the next week. So I'm sitting there and I'm on a panel with a two-star general, a retired three-star general, a one-star general, and like a senior executive service guy. And then there was Lieutenant Colonel Woodhouse, freshly promoted, air defense guy sitting on the space panel. So there was a little bit of like imposter syndrome right away, right? Because I'm sitting out in front of this audience and I'm like, there's all these general officers up here that have had significant amount more experience. They understand the strategic environment. They've worked in the Pentagon. They've had these opportunities I haven't had. So, like, where will I fit in and how will I differentiate or add something to this panel when it gets to me on the discussion? So, unbeknownst to me, I expected every single one of these presenters to be completely transparent and, get into the difficult statements and how we got to work through challenges. And after the first three speakers, every single one of them had mentioned how we're going to seamlessly do something. We're going to seamlessly move information from space to the you know, ground. We're going to seamlessly integrate our systems with our allies. We're going to seamlessly, observe the commander's going to observe the cop, and then he's going to make a decision. It's going to seamlessly get out there, and the soldier on the tactical front line is going to be able to act on, the commander's authority. And then it got to me, and I just had this moment where I go, I'm going to take a different approach here. Nothing I've ever done in life, let alone the military, has been seamless. Nothing. I'm like, seamlessness it implies perfection. It implies a smoothness level where there's zero flaws, right? There's zero bumps in the road. And I'm like, I think seams have actually gotten a bad rap, especially in the military, because a seam is where two things come together. And there's always gaps and seams, right? No matter how tight that seam is, there's always these little seams. And I think the responsibility of a leader is to identify these seams, these strategic seams, and figure out how do you smooth those out? Do you smooth those out with people? Do you smooth them out with technology? Do you smooth them out with a process? How do you make things work more efficiently? And then how do you continuously observe and look at those seams to make sure that whatever you're putting there to plug or fill that gap is continuously working? And I said that, and I got a huge response and a reaction from the audience and lots of good follow-on discussions. So that led me to hop on the airplane, as I was flying back to DC from LA, and I, went on the Patriot Bros website and wrote a blog story about the Joint Force and embracing the seam, and this was back in, I think, 2023 timeframe, and that was that. I kinda let it go, but something in the back of my head just kept going, "There's something more here." Like, I need to expound on this more than just a blog, So I started asking people, I'm like, "What should I do?" "Should I write an article?" I'm like, "Should I apply this beyond the military to other things?" And I kept getting told, like, "Yeah, you wanna write an article that'll get the most eyes, and this is how you gotta apply it to air defense artillery and the professions we were in." And I don't know, something was keeping me up at night where I was like, there's more, like, this came to me, this opportunity is there. I think we all, through our life, there's opportunities that arise to us every single day, right? There's just boundless opportunities for every single one of us that a lot of us get into the wrong mental framework and we don't see those opportunities, right? We get defeated. We just walk past those. We got fog. We don't look at this opportunity. And that opportunity might be like something bad just happened and that puts you on another path for a different opportunity or, a different success or win. So this moment I had this like, crucible moment where I was like, you know what, I'm going to write a book. And as someone that's undiagnosed but self-diagnosed with ADHD, when I don't want to do something, it takes me forever, right? You procrastinate, you just can't focus until the pressure's on. But if it's something I got my heart set on, like you ain't turning me off till this is done. And I just nose to the grindstone, just started pen to paper writing. And I was doing it for like weeks and weeks and weeks to the point where like in 5 weeks I had 80% there for a book. And then I'm like, well, how do you publish a book? I'll figure this out. I went online, I'm looking up publishers. There's lots of different types of publishing. There's a lot of self-publishing capabilities where you just write your own book, do everything yourself, throw it out on the market, do your own marketing. And I'm like, well, that's a path. And I've done a lot of things by myself, but I'm like, what's the other path? Well, there's traditional publishing, and to be honest, that's a lot like old Hollywood, right? It's there's this clearinghouse, there's bureaucracy, you have to get a manager that knows a manager and get you in a room, and then you better be making them a profit because 'cause they're gonna buy your book, and they're just gonna give you royalties, and they're gonna expect to make a lot of money off of it. And so when you go traditional publishing, you don't own the rights to your story anymore, of what you've written, right? The publisher owns it, and you just get a kickback for the royalties and the things you do. But I stumbled across this third path that's called hybrid publishing. So essentially, you submit your manuscript to a hybrid publisher. They read through it. They make sure it's something that fits within their publishing, ethos, and they decide to take you on as a client. And then it's kind of a pay to play where you decide how many books you want to print, how much help you want as far as editing, how much help you want as far as graphic design, copy editing, distribution, etc. And then they basically tailor a contract for you, and you have kind of the best of the breed that already understand the book community. They have the best printing presses. They know distributors like Barnes and Nobles and Amazon, etc. And they do all that kind of groundwork for you because they're experienced in it. So it takes some of that weight off you. So you're investing in yourself a little bit, but the benefit of that was I own everything, right? I own all my book, all my story. So that's the route I went. So that was in 2023. I just signed a contract with a group called Amplify Publishing Group. If there's anybody out there that's interested in doing hybrid publishing, I highly recommend them. They were super professional, super helpful all along the way. And that's when we came up with the book. And one of the cool things I did when I came up with Seam, you'll learn if you write a book that and you get professionals involved that there's a lot of things that you don't think about normally. Like originally, I was like, I'm gonna call it Seam, stitching together a winning strategy. Play on the Seam thing. And, they got professionals that are going through like website optimization, search engine optimization, other books. How does this tell anybody that sees the book, like what it's actually about? Is it for leaders? Is it for business? And they coached me through all that. And that's where we came up with the adapted strategy framework for leaders because it kind of differentiates what the book is tailored for. Um, and one of the unique things is as I was writing this book, as any good military officer would do, I decided to make STEAM into an acronym as I was writing the book. So the S stands for strategize, the E stands for execute, the A stands for assess, and the M is for modify. And that's not novel in itself. You and me have done the military decision making process. We've heard of the loop. You know, there's different things out there that all do the same thing, right? You have a situation, you get the information you need, you make a decision based off that information, you assess your decision, and then you move on to the next step. There's nothing novel about that. But the reason I call this the adaptive strategy framework is I just made a framework using that acronym to give people the tools to just get through everyday life, whether you're a leader in the military, whether you're a stay at home mom, whether you're an entrepreneur. The entire book is focused on identifying that perfection does not exist. Better is sometimes the enemy of good enough, right? You put so much pressure on yourself as an individual to do things better and to be perfect. And it's like improvement's great. We should always be seeking to improve, but at some point, it's a diminishing return, right? You're putting so much pressure on yourself to be so much perfect in all these areas that you're burning yourself out and you're actually not the best you can be. So that's kind of what the book gets into. It talks about my military strategy training that I'd had, and then going back to Maddox's condition and the basically unpredictable nature of a child with special needs, and all those things that I had learned in the military about how you can literally gather all the data you need in and put this stuff in a frame the environment and decide the desired end state, and you're going to do these tasks and we're going to stay on track and all this thing's going to be perfect and that's how you succeed. I was like, that's great if you understand the environment, but if you know the environment is you're never gonna understand it, that makes that process a little bit, of a fallacy.
Yeah, absolutely. So as it pertains to the book, so you talked about adaptability is more valuable than certainty. Was there a moment in your military career that proved uh, that lesson to you beyond any doubt?
I think there's probably several instances I could focus on, that that I learned. I think the first moment of, adaptability versus certainty was, goes all the way back to when I was, like, a first lieutenant, and, I got sent over to Korea for the first time. Now, mind you, at that point, I'd been in the active duty force, past all the training and stuff for maybe, like, 18 months. So you're 22, 23 years old, wet behind your ears, and all of a sudden, we're going to a foreign country. I'd never even traveled outside of the US other than, Canada and Mexico, and, they said, "You're gonna be the officer in charge of the advance party to South Korea." So they sent me there with, like, a group of 35, 40, grown men and women, and then a handful of young enlisted soldiers, and then this 23-year-old that has no clue, no certainty whatsoever what to expect, right? I'd never been to a foreign country. I didn't know what an advance party was. I didn't know how to interact with these senior leaders from, like, the brigade I was supposed to meet with, and I was supposed to be able to, like, coach, teach, and mentor and make sure everybody's good to go on this advance party. And I just remember, you know, at that point, it was definitely a moment where I was like, "Look, right? You just need to take a deep breath, and you just need to go step by step. You need to be humble. You need to be honest. You need to ask for help where you don't know something, and everything will work out all right." And, at the end of the day, it was extremely, frightening. It was definitely it was like I mean, I was frightened as a grown man, right? Young man, but grown man, I was frightened. You got this 6'3" guy, athlete, I'm out there, I'm an officer in the army, I'm ready to go, and it's like, now I'm in this country, and I'm like, I have no clue what I'm supposed to do. Um, but I just started asking for help, uh, being transparent, but also being professional in front of the folks that I was in charge of, and that was a real probably first opportunity where I saw a team that was brand new stuck together. Because when you're on an advance party, you're with people from a large footprint of, like, 700, 800 people that you serve with, and they take a whole bunch from different units, so I had served with these folks, but I didn't know most of them by name. And we built a team really quick, right? Because you're all going through experiences. Some of it's new for some people, some of it's not. And you just learn how to balance those attributes of what people know and don't know with your responsibility. And I think that was probably the first time that I learned that, certainty is not going to solve everything. It's the ability to be adaptable and agile to your environment that'll make things okay.
Yeah, absolutely, right. Somebody asked me one time, like what is the biggest misconception that people have about leadership in the military? And my answer to them was that leadership looks a certain way. Like, I don't believe that I'm like the typical like leader guy, if you will, like in uniform. Maybe you may see 6'7", 310-pound guy, right? But if you see me at the gym, you see like 72 tattoos. You see me, I speak in a lot of slang often when I'm not in the military environment. And, and sometimes I was like, hey, they're like, what do you do? I was like, oh, I'm in the military. They're like, oh, so what kind of rank are you? I was like, well, I'm a lieutenant colonel. They're like, what? And they're like, you don't look like a leader, right? Yeah. And in my mind, from my experiences, I'm like, what does a leader really look like? Like, what kind of picture got painted, right? For those who've probably never been in those positions, so they don't kind of really understand. It's kind of like you're saying, like leadership is you got to be highly adaptable in order to make it in this current operational environment, and probably in the past. If you want to succeed, you're going to run into roadblocks. Like, it's kind of like the SWOT analysis, right? There's a lot of things going on, and then you got to figure out at the end of the day, what are those threats to what you're trying to accomplish? And sometimes there is not a doctrinal explanation for how to solve problems. So as I kind of talk to that, so for you, what do you think the biggest misconception people have about leadership in the military is?
So I think one of the biggest misconceptions or the biggest fallacies out there, and I know you've met people like that, is, you need to be a chameleon. You need to be able to change your colors in your environments and understand your environments. Just as you talked about, like, hey, if I'm in the gym, I'm wearing my cutoff, I'm talking more in slang, I'm being, more this version of Ray. And then when I'm in uniform, I'm, using this type of, lingo because that's the military lingo. And I think that's fine. I think that's actually necessary to understand how to talk to someone that might be, professor in academia and then also be able to talk to an 18-year-old soldier. But I think the biggest misconception is when you're a chameleon, when you're able to change and be adapt to your environment, you still have to be true to yourself, right? You can't it cannot be a yes, authenticity is key. You can't be an actor to go, "I'm gonna say and do the things I think people want me to say and do in this environment." You have to put yourself in that environment and go, "I'm gonna be in this environment and make people feel comfortable with me in that environment, but also still be authentic to myself." And I think that's a huge misconception because I've met a lot of folks that are trying to say and do things that they expect others want to hear or see, and it's like, then who are you at the end of the day, right? Then that's where you get lost and you go, I'm whoever the environment tells me I have to be at the moment." And it's like, no, in order to find yourself, you gotta do some deep reflecting and understand what your core values are. And my father told me this when I was, like, 18. He gave me a prayer, cut it out, laminated it, gave it to me, put it in my wallet. And I remember this is right after I did, ROTC and got a scholarship, and he gave it to me, and I'll never forget it because my dad's not a man of words. But the first, thing was a prayer, and at the end it goes, "Son, be true to yourself always, and others will follow." And I truly took that to heart from day one, and you've known me for a very long time, and, I am not one to not speak my mind in a very respectful way and be honest, and I also know my place where, if yes, but I also know my place where if I'm not the responsible decision maker, if I've done my effort to tell them my opinion and to give them the advice that I have from my foxhole, and they choose to hear that but not act on it, then I also understand, like, that's their decision to make. That's the role that they're playing, and I respect that. And, there's a lot of respect to yourself and your own core values, as well as respect to others and having empathy and understand the positions they're in that make a good leader. Because I think, we learned about this too in, the command and general staff colleges. Some great leaders depend on great followers, right? Because you can take a great leader and you could put them in the wrong group of people and in the wrong temporal, situation where they just don't have enough time to get that team together or the right environment to get that team together to be winners. And that person might be deep down in their core a great person, a great leader, but in that situation, it didn't work out. And so I understand that there's some luck involved. I also understand that there's a lot of other people involved in my success, and I take that to heart, and I try to remind myself that all the time. Um, but I definitely don't have all the answers.
I had this quote and it says, "There is no such thing as great leaders. There are only great followers that make leaders seem as such." So it's kind of like what you got going on, because I've showed up to some teams and I was like, okay, I don't know what's going on in this thing, but the people who were there were professionals and experts, and they were making it happen. So people were like, "Rashad, man, you on top of the game." But really, it was the people who were there who were teaching me how to be what I need to be in that particular area. So, since we're talking about the leader right now, right? So in Seam, like you argue that leadership isn't about having all the answers. It's about building adaptable people. What does that look like in practice?
Um, I'll give you a couple things because I talk about it as internal lessons. I also talk about as lessons you need to, as a leader, be teaching and kind of emulating to your team, right? So one of the concepts I have is called partial framing. All right, so you've always heard that you got to frame the problem, right? You got to frame the problem. So we all know a traditional frame's got four sides, right? So now I've locked in the answers. The answer's somewhere in here. Here's the problem. I'm gonna find the answer in this box. And yeah, there's no box. Life is continuously moving. It's in motion, right? Think of molecules and atoms. Just life is constantly in motion, and there's no way that you can just lock everything in and say, I have all the problem framed here, and I'm gonna come up with a solution. So the concept of partial framing that I came up with is picture that frame with three sides, right? So you have some rigidity, you have some things that are known, and you have a space for core elements of the problem you're trying to solve, and the mission that you're on or the solution you're looking for. But then at the bottom of that frame, right, there's kind of a an embryonic membrane where things can come in and out, right? It's open. It's like a fluid spot where opportunities and temporal evolution is happening, right? Where your environment's still in motion underneath that frame, where different things can come in to your frame as you're trying to come up with solutions and work through it. And that's what I call the adaptive space. Right, that's what the adaptive space is, where you have the core foundational things that you're trying to solve, but then you're also factoring in that there's going to be new information continuously moving in, so you have to be able to adapt as you're going through, framing your situation. And once again, I don't think that's a novel idea, right? Because it's just like what we just spoke about, right? You have to have your core attributes and your core values, and then you have to be adaptive to your environment and be able to still be true to yourself and authentic, but also understand the environment you're going to be in changes, which is going to make you react in different ways. And it's the same thing, but just put into a different concept. So that's one of the first things I came up with is that whole partial framing concept. What do you think about that?
Yeah, thinking about partial framing and the proverbial box, right? I one of my speeches that I gave, I spoke about the box. The box is where limits are. You can only see the walls inside of the box. And in order for you to really grow, you're going to have to push that top off the box, right? You're going to have to look out of the box. And when you look out of the box, then you're going to see all of the things that are available to you because the box only has limitations. Like if you operate within the four walls, that's the only thing that you can possibly achieve is what's within inside. And if you have the ability to say, you know what, the box has me enclosed. I cannot see what's on the outside. And the only way for me to truly grow and truly become what's available to me is that I'm going to have to move outside that thing, right? So, when I think about those type of things, I think about teams, teams that like operate in the confines of what only their leader can give them. Because sometimes leaders are like, "Hey, do what I say," like you're thinking about things not the way that I want you to, and I think that's a leadership habit that like we kind of got to stop. We got to like, "Hey, man, come with your idea. Let me know what you got. Like enlighten me. Maybe I don't know something that you could teach me." So for you, the question for you is, as the leader, is what's one leadership habit that you think like every leader or executive should stop doing tomorrow?
Probably this is one of my biggest faults, right? It's one of my biases that I'm very self-aware of is a lot of leaders, especially seasoned leaders, project this idea that the baseline of the person I'm talking to is my baseline. And so, the way I think, the way I do things, that should be how they think and do things. That's the starting point, and then we're going to move forward from that. And as soon as they hit reality that my baseline is not that person's baseline, they immediately devalue that person because they don't think and act exactly like they are, like, "How do they not know this?" You know? "Why is this person being idiotic?" Like, they should know this, they should understand this, I understand this, and they devalue them, and then they don't actually get the value out of their opinion and understand that they have the ability to innovate. So back to the box conversation, we were always told, growing up, "Hey, think outside the box," right? "Think outside the box," right? My whole thing, and I know this is one of your core values, is know what's in the box, then that allows you to innovate and think outside of what you know, right? And that's the whole thing about the core elements, right? So you and I were big on understanding military standards, military history, military doctrine as a foundation to understand things, and then we were allowed to innovate and change because it's not prescriptive. But the thing that a lot of folks would do is, you ask a soldier to innovate and they start coming up with something and they don't know those core values, and then you immediately devalue them. "Oh, they should have known that." No, that's a teaching opportunity. That's an opportunity for you to share to them, like, "Did you know that Army regulation this says this? Did you know that you could go online and there's a website that you could pull up doctrine and technical manuals and read these things and understand them, and then factor that in and then see if your idea still makes sense, right? That's a teaching moment, not a moment to fail as a leader and project your expectations onto someone. So I think that's something to be very cognizant of as a leader, is to understand that where you are, no matter if someone's your peer, no matter if someone's a higher echelon or your superior, don't project that where you are, your baseline is their baseline, right? Don't do that, because then you're just gonna be disappointed whether theirs is much higher than yours or much lower than yours. You just need to understand that we're all different and then build upon that.
I learned that lesson as a battery commander. Tough love, right? My first sergeant, Tammy Coleman at the time, she told me, she says, like, I'm hard charging. I'm like, what's up with all this? They ain't getting it. And she says, sir, everybody's not you. And when she said that, I was like, what you mean, Tammy? I'm gonna go first, sergeant. What you mean? She's like, how you see the world and the things that everybody isn't there yet. They don't want to push forward like you want to push forward. So we got to accept whatever 100% they currently have and see if we can build on that. And when she told me that, I literally reflected, because I've always been told, like, go get it, go to the max, give it your all. That's just how I'm wired as a person, right? And then when I was in charge of a bunch of people, I was lucky to have her, because she was able to make me understand, like, hey, like I said, I've always been super doctrinally sound. I know all that stuff. I just read and read and read and read. And then in my mind, I was like you just said, I was that guy. I was like, I don't know this, but then when I became a captain career course instructor, I was hearing all of these different points of views. And then I was just like, man, I am lacking somewhere. Not because I wasn't smart in the book. I was learning about how people were doing it in different operational environments. And I added that into my mental reservoir. And then it changed again when I was a professor of military science at the University of North Alabama, because now I go from all of these people, Army officers who are teaching things in class. I'm learning from them. Now I'm actually teaching people who know nothing about the Army. So now I had to, like, really change the way that I'm thinking, and I built on doctrine, but how do I help you understand why this thing is important to you and the value that you can add when you get to an organization? So I mean, and also talking to you, like, like I just reached out to you like a couple of weeks ago, like, hey, Woody, I got this thing, man. Tell me about it. I told my captains and the majors, I was like, hey, I got to reach out to my boy. I said, because he know about this stuff. In the box, I can say, hey, the manual say do this, but the manual ain't jiving at this time. It's kind of like what we were talking about, like jumping equipment all the time. And I'm just like, I'm not making any sense in this operational environment. There's too much stuff going on, and the threat is too prevalent. And now, if you start moving stuff, you're gonna lose stuff. So 100% on with you. But I kind of like, I want to stay hip to the book, right? So like back to scene, right? Like, what conversation were you hoping scene would start that wasn't already happening in leadership circles?
So really, at the end of the day, right, it's a it's a it's a perspective thing, right, of what a leader is, right? Because I could argue that a leader is not just somebody that's in charge of, like a manager in charge of a group of people. Like, we're responsible every morning when we get our head off that pillow to put our left foot in front of our right and lead ourselves through the day, right? Like, your conscience is your leader, right? It's talking to you all day long. It's saying, we got to go do this. We got to go do that. We should make this decision. We should probably think about this decision. So even though the book is written for leaders, it's also just written for individuals to understand how to think and how to not put so much pressure on themselves to be perfect, right? And I don't get into it in the book a lot, but I truly believe that in today's day and age, with especially with AI and social media and all this stuff that's out there that's polluting our minds as humans, that you're seeing this ridiculous trend of depression and anxiety and, in the military, like suicide, right? And then it's rising like crazy, and I think a lot of that is because we put this expectation or this pressure on ourselves that there's something we have to live up to. There's some perfect thing that we have to be, and if we're not there, then we start feeling less of ourselves. And I think people just need to realize that nobody, I don't care if you're Elon Musk, I don't care if you're the president of the United States, I don't care who you are, nobody has all the answers, and nobody's 100% of the time happy and feeling good about themselves and their decisions. They're all human beings and they're struggling. So you need to understand that, like, yes, there's all these things that you can go out there and accomplish, but if you accomplish 50% of what I accomplished, that doesn't make you less of a winner or less of a person, right? Everybody's maximum, like you mentioned earlier, is a different level, but what you have to do is you just have to start giving yourself credit to taking that step forward and making progress. And if there's a day where you can't take that step forward, or there's a fork in the road, or something slows you down, you hit a wall. That What are you going to do from that point on? What are you going to learn and understand that that's part of your success? That's part of the path to moving on, not the path to perfection, but the path to moving on. And, I'm just that's what the seems really supposed to get at, is the fact that, perfection is a fallacy, and you need to look at every opportunity from, you know, personal relationships of people that you're in charge of, your personal relationships, your calendar, how much time you're investing into different activities, right? People always talk to us about you got to have balance, work life balance. And it's like that. What balance is to some people, they just see a flat teeter totter, right? It's just flat. Like we're completely even, we're balanced, and it's like no, the balance that we used to deal with is like, I have to constantly be watching the family side and the work side and make sure neither one of them ever hits the ground, right? So when you start when the work side starts getting more of, less of the weight on it, and the family's up here, you're like, oh, I need, maybe I got to spend a little more time with the family and even this out. And you have to be conscious about that. And that's not easy. And so that's where I just talk about, I give different methods. Um, Another concept I came up with, a lot of these things are tied to my I have a marketing major from when I was in undergrad. So I try to think about, like, what's a catchy kind of marketing thing to remember some of these key attributes of the way I've been thinking. So one of the other things I talk about is proactive reactiveness. Right, and this kinda comes back to when we were, in, young soldiers, and we're learning, like, squad drills, like infantry squad tactics, and one of them key ones was react to contact, right? You're moving with a group of folks, you're going through, the woods or the desert, whatever, and then you come across an adversary, an enemy, an object, right? And then you react to it, and you've trained on what the next steps are when you come across this, you know whatever this critical moment is, you've trained on how you should act, whether that's be, an ambush situation, or just a group of people out there that you don't recognize or whatever. But you've trained to these scenarios. And I was like, you know what? That's essentially just you training to know your environment's going to change, right? You're telling yourself your environment's gonna change. So the idea of proactive reactiveness is understanding that any decisions you make now, any plan you have now is going to change. That's natural. So you need to start thinking through how that may change. And thinking through how that may change might not be thinking about that exact specific problem you're trying to solve. It might be just bettering yourself, like taking in more information, reading more books, talking to more people, experiencing more things. That might help you have the tools needed to, when you get to that object, you can react to it appropriately. So that's kind of the whole concept of proactive reactiveness, is understanding, once again, life's in motion, decisions are in motion, your environment's in motion, and you have to have the tools ready to be able to be reactive and be agile and understand that that's okay.
Yeah, no 2 days are the same. Like whatever you experience one day, the likelihood of you experiencing the same thing, or Groundhog Day, if you will, the next day is not likely. Um, we are constant in a state of flux. Even with the show, right? You start the show, you see what's going on, You know, like, hey, I got the technological tools here, but my stuff might not work. So got to be prepared, man. You know, like, so, I mean, you're preparing for what could go wrong because you know that the world is not concrete. You know, like, I tell you throughout our both our careers, I mean, we've been in always been in pretty much different places. We were moving pretty fast on the same trajectory, if you will. We stayed in touch. We talked about all the things that kept changing where we're at. And sometimes I don't have the answer. So I'm like, hey Mike, hey, what's up with this, bro? What you got? What y'all doing over there? Hey, send me that slide deck. Let me see how that thing looks. Or, hey, can you look at this for me? Because what we used to do is no longer the same due to how things are rapidly changing. And I think as the world changes, you have to change as well. But I also think it's important to understand that change is not simply a you thing, especially in leadership. Change is a we thing. I always use that acronym when I say team. Together everyone achieves more. But really, what it's saying to everyone is like, hey, man, lean on the things that you have available to you. If you really want to succeed, lean on the things that other people have within their mind because they experience different things and they can share those things. But the key to that is that you have to be willing to accept it. You can't be a stubborn dude and be like, I got this. I ain't worried about all that. I'll figure it out. You gotta say, hey, you know what? You got a point there. And I'm gonna heed that and I'm gonna try it. But it takes some courage. Like what is what's the favorite chapter in the book? What's your favorite chapter, bro?
Oh, it's chapter 1. It's chapter 1. It's the whole story of where the whole concept of SEAM came from. I talk about, that panel, I talk about Maddox, I talk about sitting on that airplane and looking around and seeing the rivets and everything that's on the airplane and go, an airplane has all these rivets and these things that allow it to flex and move in the air. And, bridges, like I talk about this bridge in Japan that is immaculate bridge, but it's able to flex and move in the environment and stuff, and that flexibility allows it to survive, right? Because if those things were just solid and had no flex in them, they'd just fall apart, right? The fuselage would just fall apart of the plane. And, all these things in my mind were once again, these small little signs that were telling me, like, "Put that on paper and just give that to someone. Somebody will look at that, someone will read that, maybe someone will watch this podcast and go, 'You know what? That makes a little bit of sense. That helps me think a little different. That helps me give myself a break, a little more in certain situations.'" Um, and another thing, being I got my master's in organizational leadership. I was in leadership roles. I'm a trained strategist in the army. I did all this stuff. And the one thing I could tell you is for someone that's read hundreds of books on strategy and leadership, they're all too damn long. They're all just so long. They're all 3, 4, 500 pages long, and by the time you finish the book, you're like, "Yeah, I have a few anecdotes that I remember or, like, a part of this chapter that really stuck with me, but there was just this ridiculous amount of information." So, I kept that in mind because, the whole idea of SEAM is perfection's a fallacy, right? Better is the enemy of good enough. So, I'm like, I wrote the book. I was like, when I was going through the editing process, I'm like, "I can make this chapter better. I can make this case study longer. I could do this," and then I'm like, "No, you're not, because that's the complete opposite of what you're telling people. You need to live with it. You need to understand that it's good enough. It's 114 pages, right? Look at that. It's 114 pages. You can read this. You can get on an airplane, 2-hour domestic flight, finish this book. It's real easy reading. Uh, Another kind of inside joke for folks that are military watching this is if you take the dust cover off, it's essentially the green book that Army soldiers and officers can get from the supply cage and keep in our cargo pockets. So I use that as the goal of the template and size and shape of the book. But yeah, I mean, the whole idea of writing this was just like, I'm seeing signs, I'm evolving and growing as a father and as a leader and as a human, and I feel like now's the time to just put it down and I didn't write this for me. I wrote this to share my story. Um, I also wrote, I guess a little bit was it for me because I always like to challenge myself. When someone says don't do something, I have to complete that and be like, I did it. So I did it for like the idea of writing a book I did for me, but I didn't write all the stuff in the book, all the content for me to just sit with. I already had that in my head. I wrote it down because I'm like, there's going to be somebody out there that I may not be able to reach or meet in person that might get a chance to read this book or have someone hand it to them, and it might help them. It might save a life. It might improve someone's life. It might help someone think differently. And, at the end of the day, someone might read it and go, I don't like any of that stuff. And you know what? It's only 100 pages, a couple hours of their life gone. It's like watching a bad movie. You'll get over it and forget about it later. So, the last thing I want to hit on really just comes down to you kind of touched on this a few minutes ago about the environment constantly changing and the difficulty in that is parenthood, right? Because, you know, I grew up in the 80s. I grew up with a boomer as a father, born in the 40s, grandfather in World War. It was a different life. We're outside all the time. You're never inside. You're in parks and programs and with mentors and babysitters, especially if you had working family that weren't at the house. And, now I'm in an environment where like I got a 10 and 11-year-old boy, and that is not their environment, right? I can't rest on my laurels and go, I figured this out. This is how you're supposed to raise your child. It worked for me because my environment was completely different than their environment. And also me as a person and my experiences were completely different than their experiences. So I think that's important to know too, as parents out there, right? There's no such thing as a perfect parent. And you'll see if you actually go into some of these parent groups and, people might say they got it all figured out. Most people that tell you got it figured out don't have kids, right? They're like, no tablet time and you got to have this calendar and you got to have this structure and you got to do, there's no such thing. There's no, dog whisperer when it comes to kids, right? Not all kids are the same, and you have to understand that their environment's different, and be willing to, you know, be respectful, be professional, be a leader, be the mentor they need to be, but also be understanding and that their environment is changing and it's different from what you have, so that you can both grow together.
Yeah, absolutely. Rakim didn't experience what I experienced, and I'm happy for that, right? He was able to, but I was very cognizant that he was growing up in a different time than I, and I didn't push any of that things on him. I let him become who he was gonna become, and you're absolutely correct. No kid is the same, even though they may be in the same house, they still experience different things. Hey, so we got like 3 minutes left, bro. So I'm gonna give you this final question, and you take it to however you want to go. Right? It is the conversation as it pertains to conversations, you know, and what one thing would you want people to know today? Like if you were to leave them with one thing, what would it be?
Listen, listen. A lot of and not just listen to others and be focused in the moment. A lot of people are distracted, so I think that's a huge problem, especially in relationships, is not being an active listener, not actually sitting there and being in the moment. I think you can have a much better life experience and the human connection appropriately if you start focusing on the moment you're in and what people are saying. But this also applies to listen to your conscience and listen to your gut, because we all know we've been in moments where you just know, I shouldn't do this. I shouldn't take that step. I probably shouldn't do, you know, somebody told me this and I know better, and we don't listen to ourselves. And then we find ourselves in a bad situation. We might learn from that, right? It might be a recoverable situation, which thank God it was, right? But it also could lead you to a situation that's tragic. So, it's really about understanding that there's so much distraction in the world, and you should really trust your gut, listen to your conscience, right? And then also when you're in a discussion or a relationship or a moment with other people, to make sure that you're giving them the respect and actively listening to them. I think that will just make people's lives more fulfilling if they just listen.
Oh, good words, bro. Everybody, thanks for listening to the show. We had Michael Woody Woodhouse, the author of Seam. Hey, go cop you a book. There you go, right there. We'll make sure you get all the information you need to purchase it. So stay tuned. This was CIME, and thank y'all for tuning in.
Free audio post-production by alphonic.com.